G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks After Ukraine War Update for the 4th of May 2026. I'm your host, the author David Applegate, author of the books The manosphere, Power Games, Into the Osmond, and the Erotic Tales from the Empire. Alright, part 3 is coming out soon. Now, as we go around the map, there is a lot of drone attacks. Yes, it was a heavy, over 700 allegedly launched, though Ukraine puts the number at 220. There is a discrepancy always between, but never this wide before, between the numbers Russia says they launched and the numbers Ukraine says. But neither here nor there. We do know that a lot of drones were launched, and we do know a lot of the Russian drones are decoys. Now, a lot of them do not make it to their target for various reasons, so it could be whatever's reported and counted by the volunteers over at Live Map, rather than or battlefield reporting, whatever, is never truly accurate anyway. But still, I find it unusual that there'd be such a large discrepancy. As you think Ukraine would say, hey, we shot down, but never mind, we'll move on from that. We do have a lot of drone attacks on Prokrovia, Kharkiv, Kyiv, Mykolaiv, Odessa. We have artillery and rocket fire on various positions, including Kherson. Russia saying they've launched operations in to expand the buffer zone. Over 38 stories just on Kupiansk, but there seems to be no update to the map, but the fighting is around here and here. So, yeah. And, yeah, that's neither here nor there. They are always fighting there. Lyman seems to be a holding action. Russians are putting pressure on Ukrainians at Kiviluka, and they are advancing west of Seversk. Have taken more territory, not much. As they said they would, they'd be attacking the supplies to the positions here, preparing to lay siege to these towns, as they also continue their operations here at Kostakovia. They have made little progress, but some progress at Ivaninka and here in the south, but there is still not much, and there's, as you see, renewed fighting in various areas. Just started just now, fighting all across the map, but as you can see, there's no major town. The Russians are still pushing. They haven't gotten far into Novolek. They have made little progress here, but not much. And as we go around the map, there are areas which are now, some movement, but not much. Bit of movement, not much. Very, very little movement. Mostly just backwards and forwards. Again, whenever the Ukrainians do lose territory, they have to bolster that position. So the Russians are probably bracing themselves for counterattacks while they hit the troop concentrations in other areas. But they've made very little progress today, which of course Ukraine will say, we're winning, we're halfway to Moscow. All of this brought to you, or I am supported by you, the viewing audience. I'd like to take you a moment to remind you that to help support the channel, you can. I have a Shopify store. Links in the description below. Please and thank you. All goes to help support the channel, new equipment. These microphones don't pay for themselves, you know. They do tend to burn out. Alright. 3 years ago, Russia announced a new infantry fighting vehicle. They did put it on display. But it's done a few tours of trade fairs and arms shows. And a whole bunch of them were actually sent east, not west. These are headed east, not to Ukraine, but to proving grounds in Siberia. Now, they were to be tested for battlefield. Now, the Bororang is a prototype modular amphibious vehicle. It was built up from the BTR-82, which was considered a stopgap measure. Now, this became itself a stopgap measure. Yeah, it's a 30mm autocannon, which is starting to make the rounds on ships. Now, it itself became a stopgap measure for the development of the T-15. Now, the T-15 and the T-14 have undergone various reforms and various testings, and they have shown off various prototypes. Again, none of them have replaced the BTR-82. It is now widely believed that the T-15 prototype is in preparation for the T-20 or T-25 program, which may actually see a replacement to the T-90 or upgrades to the T-90. Most of the T-14 and T-15 technology development, same with the Bomberang, have gone back into the BTR-82. This is unusual. Normally, when Russia is transitioning technologies, they'll pick a primary mainstay like the T-72, produce an intermediary like the T-80, and then a replacement model, the T-90. Normally, they would split any developments across, so you'd have some of the T-80 technologies go back to the T-82, and some of the T-80 technologies were the basis of the T-90, and eventually, but the Russians took a long time to get rid of the T-80 because they were exporting a lot of them, and they actually had a lot more orders than they had vehicles lying around. And they had more demand for second-hand vehicles than they had lying around. And they had a lot of soldiers. Now, I don't know how well the subtle differences work. I'm not a tanker. But I'm told the difference between is subtle enough that for crew familiarity is a big issue. And so the T-90, which was supposed to be replaced by the T-14, and the T-72 was supposed to be scrapped. Instead, turns out the T-72 wasn't being scrapped because they had a lot of them and no buyers, and so they upgraded them. And again, it has a lot to do with familiarity and the subtle differences. Like I think the T-80 is faster than the T-90. The T-90 has a better reactive armor. But they all have the same gun, and there's not much weight difference as they get upgraded. But their new heavy tank, again, Russia's developed more equipment than it needs. And so a lot of these become prototypes, and when they cannot figure out if they can upgrade their factories to mass produce, I think that's why you have, the T-55s to the T onwards in the different factories, different upgrades. And that's why you have the subtle differences between the tanks, because it's about craftsmanship and production. You want a well-crafted machine that's going to last. Right. And a lot of these older tanks are actually built on T-55s and upgrade, just basically replacing the top shell. Russia does a lot of things on the cheap, but I think eventually they'll reach a point where they have to upgrade their facilities, but they are stalling for time. Speaking of stalling for time, UK has decided to prolong the war by... they're not just joining the EU $90 billion loan. Well, currently they've been able to raise $78 billion. Apparently the EU has fallen short, and the UK is going to loan the rest to bring it up to $90 billion, which will prolong the war. Well, they say for another year, but it's not. It's running about $6 billion. So it can be lower, but it's running about $6 billion a month. So Ukraine is depleted all its reserves. The war costs more than its GDP. Their tax revenue base is depleted. A lot of they're relying on actually to repay some of these loans, selling weapons to various countries. But these drones are nothing but, most of these drones are novelties, and Britain does it better anyway. So why would they buy inferior technology? Well, it's all about ego stroking. The Liberals and they want bigger, thinking EU being bigger, will be bigger than the USA, will be the number one. We'll crush Russia we'll show them. And so their arrogance and their ego just keep shining through. And the thing is, they keep talking about Ukraine and the EU. We're all in this together. No, they're not. Okay? They're always about imposing their will on others. Right? They always talk about conformity. Well, not so much conformity. Unity, which, and now that the Hungarian leader made critical remarks about Ukraine's policy, how they've treated Hungarians in Ukraine, which was a city formerly Hungarian territory until the USSR redistributed as borders. Many in Ukraine are wondering, are we dealing with a new Viktor Orban? So what we have is clearly a case of Ukraine wanting to control and interfere in other countries' affairs and then saying, we're against Russian interference. Well, you're doing exactly the same. You are no better. No one cares about the Donbass. No one. And you wonder why the Russians don't care about Ukraine or Europe? Because Europe has no morality in this war. They do not care about the people it affects. They only care about themselves. And they're constantly talking about their safety as if there's this some giant looming threat, when in fact it's Europe looking down on Russia, kicking them through proxies, saying, ha, we can hurt you. And it's absolutely, it is not David Goliath. Okay? Russia is not the Goliath. Okay? It's a nuclear-armed gas station. If you look on paper, the size of the European armies, yeah, they're pathetic. They're parade ground. But behind those parade grounds, there are a number of countries, without the US, the Europeans could put an army on the field, about 1.2 million, very quickly and very effectively, and would fight Russia to a standstill. The problem is, of course, Russia's made it quite clear that if Europe gets too involved in the Ukraine war, they will get strategic. And they'll start, and they have made threats before and kept those promises, showing a launch strike on. Russia has the ability to destroy Ukrainian cities without nuclear weapons. They've destroyed a city to prove it. Right? And they will do it again. They've threatened to do it again. Right? They destroyed Bakhmut. They destroyed others as well. Leveled them. They're in the process of leveling Koshnikovia without using Omsk missiles or anything really too big, to prove that they are willing to scorch earth to hold back what they consider the European threat. And the Europeans just don't get it. There is no Russian threat to Europe. You're going to hear a lot about the Trump withdrawing the 5,000 troops. That's from an assessment that was actually started under Biden to draw down troops because there is no threat from Russia. And Europe won't take care of its own security. They're leaning on Europe. Europe is leaning on the US, won't live up to its mutual obligations, won't let the US use its bases as America sees fit. Europe wants to control these bases. They've made it quite clear they want to push the US out. Europe is not being abandoned by the United States. Europe is abandoning the United States to isolate America, to punish America for not following European foreign policy on Iran or Taiwan. You know, they want these strategic ambiguities to go on forever because it gives the diplomats something to do. It keeps the UN and the whole drama machine and the whole arms industry churning over, right? That's why they didn't want a strategic victory in Afghanistan. It would be no, you can't take a threat off the table. You can't take Iran off the table. You can't take threats off the table. They want more threats. Carney's made it clear that he's going to side with NATO and side with Europe, and Mexico has cut them off because Mexico's biggest threat is and was and maybe still is a armed insurrection by large numbers of foreigners within their soil. They've allowed, for the last 20 years, because so many Mexicans flooded to America, they've allowed Mexicans to flood to America because they wanted the foreign remittances. But it's not enough anymore. So they allowed Hondurans and others to fill up the labour demand. And now they're having internal difficulties with more and more foreigners wanting to come in all the time. Well, you know, it's like anti-immigration. It's like anti-immigration marches in Pakistan. Really? Well, stop going to Britain then. You know. This is the problem, right? Mass migration leads to more mass migration, leads to erosion of... That's what the UN wants. That's why they're destabilising the world, and Europe is pulling the strings, and behind Europe is the World Economic Forum, who represents all the arms dealers and all the other merchants of death, which of course includes Big Pharma. The European Parliament wants more attacks inside Russia. That's basically, the seeking military operations indefinitely. Now, Russia's, of course, voted on this to try and achieve some sort of peace deal, but Europe has ignored the they're basically just sticking to their demands. There's no negotiation. Europe, whenever they talk about negotiations, they don't mean it. They mean obedience. Everyone is talking, but no one is being honest. Now, we can surmise that Russia took 10 years to invade after the attacks on Ukraine because Europe was turning a blind eye to ethnic cleansing. But in a broader perspective, the Russian military operation has pretty much exposed that, the economic, military and political alliances that, from their perspective, exist merely because Russia won't be an obedient tool of the West. Now, this goes back to when Europe was at war with itself. That France would demand, everyone else take their goods, and other countries would say, nope, we're not going to do that. We have our own issues, we support our own industries. So had the Napoleonic Wars, England, when Germany was rising industrially, England and France sabotaged Germany when Germany was tried to quell the revolutions in Serbia as part of its alliance with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. The French declared war on Germany. No one wants the truth because the truth shatters their ego. And if you pin your ego on the notion that you're the good guy, but you won't face the truth, then you aren't a good person. You have to face the truth. Then the truth does hurt. And that's why people don't want to know that their country's engaged in war crimes in World War I and World War II, and that Clinton turned a blind eye to attacks on Serbs because the Europeans wanted to get their hands on Kosovo, that they stirred, that they broke up Yugoslavia to get their hand to, because they were, particularly Serbia, was rising competition in trade to France, rivaling France. All these things constantly keep coming up over and over again, that countries, rather than dealing with the fact that they're losing economically to someone with either superior production or superior pricing or simply a superior product, instead of accepting that they have to either double down on their efforts or protect their economy, no, they have a hissy fit. The Europeans have to start shedding their ego, because it's leading to toxic behavior. Actually, I should say egos, insecurities, right? Now, the thing is, America is doing exactly what Europe wanted. Europe demanded, right? They asked America to do something about the Straits of Hormuz. When asked to join in and participate, they said no. So Trump went it alone. And now they're upset because they wanted him to fail. And he didn't. Why? Because if Trump failed, that means they can undermine US-Russian relations. Remember, America is trying to soften the Russian nuclear stance, peace through trade, get the European meddlers out of the Americas, which is their bases in Greenland, NATO bases in Greenland and the Falklands. This is not a new foreign policy. The problem is that the Swami diplomats have always, dangled trade, saying, "Well, if you push us too far, we'll cut off trade." And that's what happens when your trade predominantly relies on, not on military alliances and fixed deals that can be broken at a moment's notice with no repercussions. And businesses needing, months and years in advance to put these deals together. And when the deals expire, you have to start all over again. It's not free trade. That's governments deliberately manipulating the economy, using war or the fear of war to control the people, so to control the markets. Always, year in, year out, right? No one is acting mature for a end game, because you can't keep increasing the economy. You can't keep growing it. And soon we'll start to see economic devaluations, right? Already, China has lost billions, perhaps even now $1 trillion. But their GDP somehow magically continues to grow. Russia has made billions of dollars on various on oil deals, and yet somehow their economy doesn't grow. They're producing more vehicles than ever, and somehow they're not growing. Now, they have a few issues. One of them is they never seem to come up with any equipment that's reliable enough to be considered first class. They're always, now in their own minds, they've now and again, but it's never for long. And I think, again, as to my opinion, that Russia too is carrying too much weight on their shoulders, and they need to pull back a little bit. I mean, England is still acting like a world power, and it's only got power. Europe only has got power because of the United States. Because Europe seems to forget, if they push too far, if they push to break up Russia, all they are doing is inviting China to invade them. China will invade Russia to prop it up, because China needs those resources. China hasn't got enough oil. Russia's got more than enough oil. Europe is destabilizing the world, though, because their markets, their 30% of their GDP comes from cash variance. Okay, right? This is why they start wars. This is why they pumped the price of oil in the Middle East. It's actually why the cost of oil in the United States is going up. Is Europe bidding up the price of US oil because the domestic price is lower than the export price? More will go to export, causing a pressure on the domestic price to go up in order to keep. And they always cry. When they cry the loudest, it means they're getting their way. Whenever they cry, "Oh, Trump's so bad," no. They never, just don't want to give him credit for anything. And they're using this war to pump the price of oil. They're using this oil to weaken Russian stance. Europe didn't want to get rid of Russian oil. They only blew up 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines to put pressure on Russia and to divert oil through other pipelines, which cost to make... It's all so that Russia wouldn't get the profits. Russia sells the oil 30% off, and the European oil companies, which can't produce any oil, resell it at a higher price in Europe and keep the profits for themselves. It's all betrayal. The Ukraine war is exposing the corruption, but so many people are so political, so lowest common denominator, that all they want is simple answers to complex problems. That they want to know that the white hat is the good guy and the black hat is the bad guy, and that the Russians would so because they want to go to a movie and see, oh, look, bad guy, he's got a Russian accent. You know, it took, 70 years before they stopped using Germans as the bad guy. And even that now and again crops up. Looking at you, Indiana Jones, and your obsession with the 1930s. But they can't pivot because they are just so enamored with their own egos, their own politics. They can't see the failure until they experience, and then when they experience it, Spirit Airlines, bail me out. You know, it's all fun and games. Well, Spirit's not the only one collapsing, but most airlines around the world are now propped up by foreign governments, right? America's still trying to be a free market. It's just, you can't be a free market when the rest of the world isn't. Europe's not a free market. Mexico's not a free market. You know, but some of these trade deals will slowly erode if Ukraine doesn't keep its word. And I believe we're seeing Ukraine right now meeting with European leaders to strike a new deal claiming, oh, it's because the US is pulling out. No, they are trying to push the US out so that Europe can take over the mineral deals, right? Zelensky's promising the minerals in return for the Russian assets in Europe. You know, this is why he's their battering ram. That's why he's got so much power right now. If he wasn't their proxy battering ram, you know, or they're stroking UK's ego, telling them, "Oh, you've got the greatest army in Europe. You're winning all the battles," you know, and people are eating this up, and it's such a dangerous thing to stroke the egos of because it's a hard fall when they lose. And the Ukraine war is going to be a hard fall. I mean, Russia's not going to get the absolute victory it wanted, but it has a victory that can't be undone. Now, I don't know if it's going to be 3 months or 6 months, but we are fast approaching Trump's hard line. And we haven't seen anything from Trump yet, but we've had phone calls between Trump and Putin, and they seem to be close to a deal, but we've heard this before. But I think they are. I think the problem is that Zelensky and Ukraine and UK keep getting in the way. They just won't accept the deal. And I think US may allow Russia to resume trade and still continue. And this is why we have a European meeting in Brussels right now to discuss sanctioning the United States if they lift the sanctions on Russia. Because Zelensky wants the maximum pressure campaign to force the Russians to withdraw from Ukraine. Zelensky's just setting himself up for a hard fall. But he doesn't care. I think he's reached a point in his life where he doesn't care. It's the dictator's dilemma. You know, when do I get out? How do I survive this? But I think he's realised that he won't, so he doesn't care. He's just riding the wave for as long as he can, thinking, oh, my children will get all the wealth anyway. No, their name will be mud. Everyone knows it. Okay, children of dictators rarely enjoyed a good life. It is often mediocre obscurity. A lot of these big wealth funds, eventually they'll too crumble. If the, because they rely on, numbers go up, they rely on wars, and if these wars, more and more wars become unwinnable, either because of drones or the fact that huge alliances could send in wave after wave of men. Afghanistan, America could have wiped out the Taliban 3 times over, but every time they did, just more would come, and eventually after 20 years, no one knows the casualty rate. No one knows how many foreign fighters died in Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, the Americans reached the conclusion Afghanistan doesn't want to defend itself. Just like Europe doesn't want to defend itself. It wants America to do it so they can continue with their welfare and free healthcare and all the other perks of not having responsibilities. Again, relying on the fact they just get to print money with their fake currency imbalances between Europe and America all the time. And they create these imbalances with war. This war is going to end, and it's not going to end well for Europe. And thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Please support the channel. You support me. Buy my books, buy my merch, support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Quick reminder, my Etsy store, Shopify store, and I'll see you all in the next video.